Blood dripped from Catherine's chin, washing away in the cold rain pooling on the asphalt. She didn't call the cops. Cops take hours. Cops ask questions. Her hands shook as she dug into her apron, pulling out a crumpled, grease-stained napkin. She dialed the number she had sworn to God she'd never use. He answered on the first ring. "Can you come get me?" she whispered, tasting copper. "Where?" a deep voice rasped. 17 minutes later, the alley lit up with blinding halogen headlights, and Hell stepped out of a black sedan. The neon sign in the window of St. Jude's Diner hadn't fully illuminated the word diner in 6 years. It buzzed a steady, irritating DNER into the damp night air. Inside, the place smelled exactly how a diner at 2 in the morning in the forgotten end of the city should smell. Burnt filter coffee, industrial bleach, and exhausted desperation. Catherine leaned against the Formica counter, staring blankly at the rain lashing against the glass. She was 27, but her spine felt 40. Her cheap orthopedic shoes squeaked slightly as she shifted her weight from one aching arch to the other. She ran a damp rag over the counter, picking up a stray sugar packet, tossing it into the bin below. Catherine wasn't a romantic. She didn't believe in white knights, and she certainly didn't believe in luck. In her neighborhood, luck was just a brief pause between disasters. You kept your head down, you paid your rent, and you didn't look the guys in the leather jackets in the eye when they came in to launder their dirty cash through the jukebox. The bell above the door chimed. Catherine didn't look up immediately. She finished wiping the counter, threw the rag into the sink, and then lifted her gaze. Leo. He didn't walk into a room so much as he occupied it. He was a tall man, broad across the shoulders, wearing a heavy, dark wool coat over a simple black Henley. Raindrops caught in his dark, greying hair. He didn't swagger. He didn't have to. There was a quiet, heavy gravity to him that made the 2 drunk truckers in the corner booth stop arguing and look down at their hash browns. Catherine reached for a thick ceramic mug, filled it with the sludge from the right side pot, and walked over to the back corner booth before he even sat down. Leo slid into the vinyl seat. It groaned in protest. He looked up at her. His eyes were dark, tired, and deeply guarded. He didn't smile. He rarely did. "Rough night?" Catherine asked, setting the mug down. She didn't use a saucer. Saucers were for the morning shift. "Long," Leo said. His voice was a low rumble, rough like a stalled engine. He wrapped his hands around the mug. His knuckles were bruised, the skin split and healing over the joints. A heavy gold signet ring sat on his right index finger. "Grill's off," she said, pulling her order pad from her apron. "I've got cold pie, cherry or apple, or toast." "Just the coffee, Catherine." He knew her name because she wore a plastic tag, but the way he said it made it sound different. Less like a label, more like a fact. Leo had been coming in every Tuesday and Thursday for 3 months, always between 2 and 3 in the morning, always sitting in the back booth facing the door. He never caused trouble. In fact, trouble seemed to actively avoid the diner when he was inside. Catherine didn't know exactly what he did, but she wasn't an idiot. The heavy coat, the scars, the expensive watch contrasting with the bruised hands, the black town car idling at the curb. He was connected. Deeply. The kind of connected that made the local beat cops look the other way. She didn't care. He tipped $100 on a $2 coffee, and he never once stared at her chest. In her line of work, that made him a saint. "Suit yourself," Catherine said, turning to walk away. "Catherine." She stopped, looking back over her shoulder. Leo was digging into his coat pocket. He pulled out a clean, crisp business card. No, not a business card. It was just a thick piece of white cardstock with a phone number written on it in black ink. He slid it across the table. "What's this?" she asked. "A number." "I see that. Plumber. Because the sink in the back is leaking, and my boss is cheap." Leo didn't laugh. He looked at her, his expression entirely serious. "If the neighborhood gets loud, if the lock on the front door doesn't hold, you call." Catherine stared at the card. A knot formed in her throat. She didn't like debts. She didn't like favors. Favors in this city usually ended up costing you your soul, or at least a piece of your dignity. "I can take care of myself. I have pepper spray." "Pepper spray is for dogs," Leo said, taking a sip of the scalding coffee. "Keep the card." She hadn't argued. She had slipped it into the front pocket of her apron. That was 3 weeks ago. It was still there, worn soft at the edges from the wash, a silent anchor sitting against her ribs. By 3:15 a.m., the diner was entirely empty. Rosa, the night cook, had clocked out early, complaining about her sciatica. Hector, the dishwasher, was in the back room, entirely deaf to the world thanks to the noise-cancelling headphones duct-taped to his skull. Catherine was cashing out the register. She was counting crumpled $1 bills, her mind drifting to her electric bill, when the front door flew open. The bell didn't just chime, it violently clattered against the glass. 3 men stumbled in. They brought the cold rain and the sharp stench of cheap whiskey and wet denim with them. Catherine recognized the one in the center immediately. Tommy. He was a mid-level enforcer for a crew running out of the South Side. Greasy hair, a leather jacket that looked too stiff, and a mouth that never stopped running. He was loud, deeply insecure, and currently very drunk. "Hey, sweetheart," Tommy yelled, slamming his hand on the counter. "I need 4 burgers, rare, and a bucket of fries." Catherine didn't flinch. She slid the cash drawer shut, locking it with a heavy clack. "Grill is off, Tommy. Kitchen's closed. We just have coffee." Tommy's face fell, twisting into an ugly sneer. His friends laughed, leaning against the booths, knocking over a salt shaker. "I didn't ask if the kitchen was closed," Tommy said, his voice dropping an octave, trying to mimic the authority of men much scarier than him. "I said I want 4 burgers. Turn the grill on, honey." "I'm not a short-order cook, and I'm not your honey," Catherine said flatly. She was too tired for this. She had dealt with Tommy before. He was a bully. You don't bow to bullies, you stare through them. "Doors behind you. Have a good night." Tommy's eyes darkened. The alcohol made him brave. It made him stupid. He reached over the counter, his large hand grabbing Catherine by the wrist. His grip was sudden, tight, and agonizing. "Let go of me," Catherine said, her voice dropping. Panic spiked in her chest, but she clamped down on it. "Or what?" Tommy mocked, pulling her closer to the counter. The smell of stale booze hit her in the face. "You gonna spray me with the little pink can on your keychain? You think you can talk to me like I'm some bum on the street? I own this block." Catherine didn't think. She reacted. Her free hand grabbed the heavy glass pot of cold coffee sitting on the burner and swung it. It smashed against the side of Tommy's head. The glass didn't break, but the heavy thud echoed through the diner. Coffee splashed everywhere, soaking Tommy's jacket. For a second, there was total silence. Tommy let go of her wrist, staggering back. He touched his temple. His fingers came away, wet. Not blood, just coffee. But the disrespect was absolute. "You stupid bitch," he breathed. Before Catherine could turn and run for the back room to get Hector, Tommy vaulted the low counter. He was faster than he looked. He caught her by the hair, yanking her backward. The pain was blinding. She screamed, but the sound was cut short as his fist connected with her cheekbone. The force of the blow sent her crashing into the steel prep table. Pots and pans clattered to the floor in a deafening crash. The world spun. Black spots danced at the edge of her vision. She tasted blood, thick and hot, filling her mouth. "Drag her out the back," Tommy spat to his friends. "Get her out of the light." Two pairs of hands grabbed her arms. She kicked, she fought. She caught one of them in the shin with her squeaky orthopedic shoe, but they were too strong. They hauled her through the swinging kitchen doors. Hector was at the sink, back turned, nodding his head to a beat only he could hear. He didn't even turn around. They kicked open the back exit, dragging Catherine out into the pouring rain and the pitch-black alleyway. The smell of the grease trap and wet garbage filled her nose. They threw her hard against the wet brick wall. She collapsed onto the asphalt, her knee scraping raw against the pavement. Tommy stood over her, breathing heavily. He kicked her in the ribs. The sharp, cracking pain stole her breath entirely. She curled into a ball, coughing, blood splattering onto the wet ground. "Think you're tough now?" Tommy laughed, kicking her again, this time in the thigh. "You're nothing. You're garbage. I'm going to teach you how to talk to people." He reared back for another kick, but one of his friends grabbed his shoulder. "Hey, Tommy, chill out. Cops patrol this alley at 3:45. Let's just leave her. She got the message." Tommy spat on the ground next to her face. "Yeah, you got the message, right?" They didn't wait for an answer. They turned and jogged back toward the street, laughing, the sound fading into the heavy downpour. Catherine lay there. The rain pelted her back, soaking through her uniform. Every breath felt like a knife slipping between her ribs. Her face throbbed with a sickening, hot rhythm. She pushed herself up onto one hand, spitting a mouthful of blood onto the pavement. She needed to call the police. She needed an ambulance. She reached into her apron with shaking, freezing fingers. Her phone was there. The screen was cracked from the struggle, but it lit up. She didn't dial 911. The police in this district worked for the crew Tommy ran with. If she called the cops, Tommy would know by morning. He'd come back. Next time, he wouldn't leave her breathing. Her fingers brushed against something soft. The cardstock. It was wet, mashed into the corner of the pocket. She pulled it out. The ink had bled slightly, but the numbers were still visible. She looked at the screen. She looked at the card. "If the neighborhood gets loud." She typed the numbers in. Her thumbs smeared blood across the cracked glass. The phone didn't ring twice. It barely finished the first electronic hum before the line clicked open. There was no greeting, just the faint sound of jazz music in the background and a low, steady breath. Catherine's chest heaved. The cold was setting into her bones, making her teeth chatter uncontrollably. "Leo," she breathed. It barely sounded like her own voice. It was cracked, broken, pathetic. She hated it. The background jazz abruptly stopped. Silence hung on the line. "Catherine." His voice was different. The low rumble was gone, replaced by a cold, sharpened steel. "What happened?" I messed up," she choked out, a tear mixing with the blood and rain on her face. "Can you come get me?" "Where?" It wasn't a question. It was a command. "The alley, back of St. Jude's." "Are they still there?" "No, just left." "Are you bleeding?" "Yes." 17 minutes, Leo said. "Hide behind the dumpsters. Don't close your eyes. I am coming." The line went dead. Catherine dropped the phone. It clattered against the wet asphalt. She forced herself to move. Every millimeter was agony. Her ribs screamed. Her cheek throbbed. She dragged herself across the pavement, pulling her knees to her chest as she wedged herself into the dark, narrow gap between the brick wall and the rusted iron dumpsters. She sat there in the dark. Minute 1. The adrenaline started to crash. The pain became a living, breathing thing inside her chest. She hugged her knees, shivering so violently her teeth clicked together. Minute 4. The rain fell harder. She squeezed her eyes shut. Why did she call him? He was a monster, wasn't he? He was part of the same underworld that Tommy worshipped, maybe worse. What was she doing involving a man like Leo Rossi in a diner squabble? He was going to pull up, see it was just a bruised waitress, and laugh. Or worse, expect payment. Minute 9. She heard footsteps at the end of the alley. Her breath hitched. She pressed a bloody hand over her mouth to silence her own breathing. It was just a stray dog picking through the trash. She let out a ragged exhale. Minute 14. She started to fade. The cold was winning. The edges of her vision grew dark, tunneling in. "Don't close your eyes," he had said. She forced them open, staring at the cracked screen of her phone on the ground. Minute 15. Voices. They were coming from the street, walking toward the alley. Loud, drunk. "Dropped my lighter out there, I think. Plus, maybe she wants round 2. It was Tommy. Panic, absolute and primal, seized Catherine. She pressed herself harder against the brick. There was nowhere to run. She couldn't stand. She couldn't fight. "Hey, look at this!" She dropped her phone. Tommy's voice was closer now, right near the grease trap. "Hey, sweetheart, you still out here? Come out, come out!" Footsteps splashed in the puddles. He was walking towards the dumpsters. Minute 17. Light exploded into the alley. It was blinding, violent, and sudden. Twin halogen headlights cut through the torrential rain, throwing harsh, elongated shadows against the brick walls. The deep, heavy roar of a massive V8 engine rattled the loose trash cans. A black Lincoln Navigator had jumped the curb, blocking the entire mouth of the alleyway. Tommy froze, throwing his hand up to shield his eyes from the glare. "Hey, the hell is your problem? Back it up!" The engine shut off. The headlights remained on. The heavy driver's side door opened with a solid thud. A heavy, leather-soled boot stepped out into a puddle. Leo Rossi stood up. He wasn't wearing his heavy wool coat. He was just in a black dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, the collar undone. The rain immediately soaked him, but he didn't seem to notice. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He closed the car door behind him. He walked into the light. Tommy lowered his arm. The drunken bravado vanished in an instant, replaced by a pale, sobering terror. Even in the dark, even in the rain, everyone in this city knew Leo Rossi. Mr. Rossi," Tommy stuttered, taking a panicked step backward. We didn't know you were down here." Leo didn't speak. He just kept walking. His face was entirely devoid of expression. It was a blank, terrifying mask of absolute violence. "Look, we were just having a little fun with the waitress," Tommy said, his hands coming up in a defensive posture. "Nothing serious. You know how it is. She disrespected me." Leo stopped 3 feet from Tommy. "Where is she?" Leo's voice was barely a whisper, yet it cut through the sound of the pouring rain like a gunshot. She's back there." Tommy pointed a trembling finger towards the dumpsters. "Look, Mr. Rossi, I'm with Sal's crew. We have a treaty, right?" "We're good." Leo looked at Tommy. He looked at the blood on Tommy's knuckle. He looked at the coffee stains on his jacket. "Sal is dead," Leo said. Tommy blinked. "What?" "No, I just saw him on—" Leo moved. It was too fast for a man his size. He didn't throw a wide, cinematic punch. He stepped into Tommy's guard and drove his palm upward, smashing into the cartilage of Tommy's nose with a sickening crunch. Tommy screamed, his hands flying to his face. Before he could fall, Leo grabbed him by the throat with his left hand, slamming him backward into the brick wall. The impact knocked the air from Tommy's lungs. Leo didn't roar. He didn't give a monologue. He simply raised his right hand, curled it into a fist, and systematically began to dismantle the man. He hit him in the ribs. Once, twice. The sound of bones snapping echoed loudly over the rain. Tommy choked, spitting blood, his eyes rolling back. Leo dropped him. Tommy crumpled to the asphalt, sobbing, a pathetic broken heap. The two friends who had followed Tommy into the alley were already running, sprinting down the street, abandoning him entirely. Leo didn't pursue them. He wiped his bruised knuckles on his dark trousers, took a slow breath, and turned his back on Tommy. He walked toward the dumpsters. The terrifying aura of violence seemed to instantly evaporate from him, replaced by a quiet, urgent focus. He found her wedged in the dark. "Catherine," he said softly. She looked up at him. She was trembling violently, her face a mess of purple bruising and blood. Leo knelt in the mud and the garbage. He didn't care about his clothes. He reached out, his large, calloused hands hovering for a second, before gently cupping the side of her face that wasn't swollen. His thumb brushed lightly over her cheekbone. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I ruined my shift." Something flickered in Leo's dark eyes. A crack in the stone. "You did exactly what you were supposed to do," he said. His voice was a low, protective rumble again. He unbuttoned his soaked black shirt, peeling it off to reveal a white undershirt, and wrapped the dry, warm inside of the shirt around her freezing shoulders. He slid his arms under her knees and behind her back. "I got you," he said, and for the first time in her deeply cynical, exhausted life, Catherine believed it. She let her head fall against his chest, listening to the steady, heavy beat of his heart as he carried her out of the dark. The interior of the Navigator smelled of expensive leather and faint cedar. It was a stark contrast to the garbage and copper tang of the alleyway. Leo set her down in the passenger seat with a surprising, terrifying gentleness. He didn't bother with a towel or a blanket for the upholstery. Catherine's blood and the filthy rainwater immediately soaked into the pristine black seats. He shut the door, cutting off the sound of the storm. For 3 seconds, she was alone in the quiet, climate-controlled cabin. Then the driver's side opened, and Leo slid in. He didn't look back at the alley. He didn't check the rearview mirror. He put the SUV in drive, and the heavy vehicle glided forward, leaving Tommy's broken body somewhere in the dark. Catherine shivered. The adrenaline was entirely gone now, leaving behind a hollow, icy void. Every time the car went over a bump, a fresh wave of nausea rolled through her stomach. She stared out the window, watching the blurred neon lights of the city streak by. I need to go to County General," she managed to say. Her jaw felt stiff. Swelling had already begun, pulling the skin tight across her cheekbone. "No hospitals," Leo said. His hands were perfectly steady on the steering wheel. "Hospitals have protocols. Protocols mean police. Police mean reports. I don't have insurance for a private clinic." It was a stupid thing to say. A pathetic, poor person thing to say in the passenger seat of a $100,000 car belonging to a mob boss. But her brain was misfiring. She was clinging to the rules of her own world because his world terrified her. Leo reached out and turned the heat dial to maximum. Warm air blasted from the vents, washing over her freezing legs. "You don't need insurance, Catherine. Close your eyes. Breathe." She didn't close her eyes. She watched his hands, the bruised knuckles, the heavy gold signet ring, the same hands that had just crushed a man's face with less effort than it took to open a jar. They drove for 20 minutes, leaving the decaying south side behind, climbing into the city's financial district where the buildings were glass and the streetlights actually worked. Leo pulled into a subterranean parking garage beneath a towering high-rise. He bypassed the security booth entirely. The guard took one look at the plates and hit the gate button. Leo parked near a private elevator. He was out of his seat and opening her door before she could even unbuckle her seatbelt. "I can walk," she lied. She put weight on her right leg, and her knee immediately buckled. The kick Tommy had delivered to her thigh had bruised the muscle down to the bone. She would have hit the concrete floor, but Leo caught her by the waist. He didn't argue with her. He just scooped her up again. The elevator ride was silent. The numbers above the door climbed rapidly. 50th floor, 55th, penthouse. The doors slid open to reveal an apartment that looked like a modern art museum. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering grid of the city. The floors were dark, polished hardwood. The furniture was minimal, grey and razor-sharp in its design. It felt sterile, untouched. An older man was waiting in the kitchen area. He was pulling medical supplies out of a scuffed leather bag, lining them up on a massive marble island. He wore a rumpled cardigan and wire-rimmed glasses. "Put her on the couch, Leo," the man said, not looking up from a bottle of saline. Leo bypassed the $1,000 grey suede sofa and set Catherine down directly on the kitchen counter, right under the harsh pendant lights. "I need to see the damage, Doc," Leo said, stepping back just enough to give the man room, but not enough to leave the circle. Dr. Evans sighed, adjusting his glasses. He clicked on a small pen light and shone it into Catherine's eyes. She winced. "Pupils are equal and reactive. Follow the light, sweetheart." He moved the pen. She followed it. "Good. No severe concussion, though you'll have a headache that feels like a freight train tomorrow." He put on a pair of latex gloves. His touch was clinical and fast. He prodded her jaw, her neck, and then gently pressed against her ribs. Catherine let out a sharp gasp, her hands gripping the edge of the marble counter. 2 cracked ribs on the right side, minor contusions on the thigh. The cheekbone is intact, but the skin split. Needs butterfly closures, maybe 3 stitches. Dr. Evans looked over his shoulder at Leo. "Who did she run into? A brick wall?" "Tommy from Sal's outfit," Leo said flatly. Dr. Evans paused. He looked at Leo, then back at Catherine, a deep frown settling on his face. "Tommy, well, let's get this cleaned up." The next 30 minutes were an exercise in endurance. The sting of the antiseptic, the sharp bite of the local anesthetic needle above her cheek, the tugging sensation of the stitches. Through it all, Catherine kept her eyes fixed on a sleek espresso machine across the kitchen. She didn't cry. She had cried in the alley because she was helpless. She wasn't helpless now. She was just in pain. There was a difference. Leo stood in the corner the entire time. He didn't speak. He just watched. His dark eyes tracked every movement of the needle, every flinch of her shoulders. "Done," Dr. Evans said, snipping the last thread. He placed a row of pills in a small plastic cup. "Take these now. Ibuprofen for the swelling, something stronger for the ribs. You sleep on your back tonight. No heavy lifting for 4 weeks." Catherine took the cup with a shaking hand and dry swallowed the pills. "Thank you, Doc," Leo said. He walked over, pulling a thick roll of bills from his pocket, peeling off several hundreds and handing them to the older man. "Keep her quiet, Leo," Evans muttered, packing his bag. "I don't need the police asking why I'm stitching up civilians." When the elevator doors closed behind the doctor, the penthouse fell dead silent. The rain beat heavily against the glass walls. Catherine sat on the edge of the counter, her legs dangling. She felt lightheaded. The painkillers were kicking in, wrapping her brain in thick, heavy cotton. Leo walked back over to her. He didn't look terrifying anymore. He looked tired. "Can you stand?" he asked. "I think so," she whispered. She slid off the counter, her knee held, barely. Leo guided her down a wide hallway, opening a door to a guest bedroom. It was as impersonal as the rest of the apartment. A king-sized bed, white linens, bare walls. He walked into the adjoining bathroom and came back a moment later holding a folded grey t-shirt and a pair of dark sweatpants. He set them on the edge of the bed. "Shower is through there. Take your time. Lock the door if it makes you feel better." He turned to leave. "Leo," she called out. Her voice was raspy. He stopped in the doorway, looking back. "Why?" she asked. Just one word. It held the weight of the entire night. "Why did you give me the card? Why did you come? Why did you bring me here?" Leo looked at her bruised, stitched face. He looked at the oversized, blood-stained shirt of his that she was still clutching around her shoulders. "Because you asked me to," he said. He closed the door, leaving her alone in the quiet. Morning came with a violence of its own. Sunlight pierced the gap in the heavy blackout curtains, stabbing directly into Catherine's eyes. She groaned, trying to turn over, and a blinding, searing pain ripped through her right side. The cracked ribs. The memory of the alley crashed back into her skull like a physical blow. She lay flat on her back, staring at the perfectly smooth white ceiling. The air in the room was cool and smelled of expensive, unscented laundry detergent. The sheets beneath her felt like liquid, silk or high-grade Egyptian cotton. She didn't know. She bought her sheets in plastic square bags from the discount store. She forced herself to sit up. It took 3 agonizing minutes. She was wearing Leo's grey t-shirt. It hung halfway down her thighs. She had managed to shower the night before, a blurry memory of washing dried blood out of her hair while leaning heavily against the tiled wall, before collapsing into the bed. She swung her legs over the edge. Her right thigh was mottled with an ugly, dark purple bruise the size of a dinner plate. Her face felt tight, the stitches pulling slightly with every expression. She needed to leave. The thought wasn't born of panic, but of survival. Catherine's entire life was built on a simple premise. You pay your own way, and you never owe a debt you can't afford. Right now, she was sitting in a millionaire mob boss's guest room, having been saved from a beating, stitched up by his private doctor and wearing his clothes. She was racking up a debt she couldn't calculate, let alone pay. She pushed herself up, ignoring the stabbing pain in her ribs, and limped towards the bedroom door. The penthouse was quiet. She walked down the hallway, the hardwood floor cold against her bare feet. When she rounded the corner into the living area, she stopped. Leo was in the kitchen. He was dressed in dark trousers and a crisp white button-down shirt. The sleeves were rolled up, revealing the heavy ink on his forearms, faded tattoos that looked like old mistakes and violent promises. He was standing by the espresso machine, pulling a shot into a small ceramic cup. He didn't look like a man who had nearly beaten someone to death 8 hours ago. He looked like an executive. "You're awake," he said. He didn't turn around. He heard her footsteps. "I am," Catherine said. Her voice was rough. She cleared her throat. Leo turned, holding 2 cups. He walked over to the marble island and set one down. He gestured to one of the heavy steel bar stools. "Sit. Your leg won't hold you for long." She wanted to refuse, but her knee was throbbing. She limped over and carefully hoisted herself onto the stool. She looked down at the cup. Black espresso. No sugar. No milk. I don't drink black coffee, she said, looking up at him. I just serve it. Leo held her gaze for a second. Then he turned, walked to the stainless steel refrigerator, pulled out a small carton of cream, and retrieved a sugar bowl from a cabinet. He set them both in front of her. Better? He asked. Yes. She poured a generous amount of cream and sugar into the dark liquid, stirring it slowly. She needed a minute to gather her thoughts. She took a sip. It was the best coffee she had ever tasted. Rich, smooth, entirely lacking the burnt bitterness of the diner sludge. I need my clothes, she said finally, setting the cup down. They're in the incinerator, Leo said, leaning against the counter opposite her. He took a sip of his espresso. They were ruined. Catherine's jaw tightened. My keys were in my apron. Your keys are on the console by the door. Your phone is completely shattered, but the SIM card is on the counter. She felt a flash of irritation. He was too efficient. It made her feel entirely out of control. Look, Mr. Rossi. Leo, I appreciate what you did last night. I really do. You saved my life. But I need to go home. I have a shift tonight. My boss will fire me if I don't show up. Leo put his cup down. The clink of the ceramic against the marble was sharp. He looked at her, his expression hardening slightly. You don't have a shift tonight, he said. St. Jude's is closed. Catherine frowned. What do you mean closed? Hector opens at 11. I sent a crew down there at dawn. They paid your boss for the week's lost revenue, changed the locks, and put a sign on the door. It will remain closed until I say otherwise. Catherine stared at him, anger finally slicing through the pain haze. You shut down my job? You can't do that. I need that money. I have rent. Your rent is covered. I don't want my rent covered, she snapped, gripping the edge of the counter. The sudden movement pulled her ribs, and she winced, sucking in a sharp breath. I don't want your money. I don't want a tab. I pay my own way. Do you understand? I am not one of your girls. I'm not a charity case. Leo didn't raise his voice. He didn't react to her anger. He just watched her breathe through the pain. You think this is about charity? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. You think I brought you here to make you a pet? Then why am I here? She demanded. Leo leaned forward, placing both hands on the counter. The physical distance between them vanished. She could smell his cologne, something dark, woody, and expensive. You are here, he said slowly, pronouncing every word with deliberate precision. Because Tommy is the nephew of Dominic Salterio. Salterio runs the docks on the south side. Right now, Dominic knows two things. He knows Tommy is in the ICU eating through a straw, and he knows a diner waitress is the reason I put him there. Catherine's heart dropped. The anger vanished, replaced by a cold, sudden dread. Dominic is an old-school dog, Leo continued, his dark eyes locking onto hers. He can't touch me. He knows that. So he will look for the easiest way to send a message. He will look for the weak link. If you walk out of that front door and go back to your shitty apartment with the broken lock, you will be dead before the sun sets, and they won't make it quick. Catherine swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight. Because of me? Because of me, Leo corrected softly. I made a choice in that alley. Now, I am dealing with the consequences. You stay here. You eat my food. You sleep in my bed. You don't leave this building until I tell you it is safe. Do we understand each other? It wasn't a request. It was an absolute edict. Catherine looked at the man across from her. He was a monster. He had practically admitted it. But as she looked into his eyes, she didn't see cruelty. She saw a terrifying, unbreakable shield. and it was standing directly between her and the dark. "Yes," she whispered. Leo held her gaze a second longer, then pushed off the counter. The tension in the kitchen immediately dialed back down. "Good. Drink your coffee. The tailor is coming at noon to measure you for clothes." A tailor? Catherine blinked, whiplashed by the sudden change in topic. "I just need jeans." "You need clothes that fit. I'm not having you walk around my home in rags." He turned toward his office. "Rest, Catherine. The day is going to be long." By 2 in the afternoon, the penthouse had transformed from a sterile sanctuary into a war room. Catherine sat in the guest bedroom, wrapped in a thick, luxurious cashmere robe the concierge had brought up. The tailor had come and gone, taking measurements with terrifying speed and total silence, leaving Catherine feeling like a mannequin. Through the heavy oak door of the bedroom, she could hear the low, rhythmic murmur of voices. Leo wasn't alone. She crept toward the door, pressing her ear against the cool wood. 3 blockades on the ports. They're striking the shipments, Leo. Dominic is throwing a tantrum. The voice was sharp, nasal, and entirely lacking Leo's heavy gravity. Let him throw it. That was Leo, calm, bored almost. "The shipments can route through the east side, pay the tax to the Russians. It eats our margin for the week, but it keeps the supply chain moving." "Leo, it's not just the margins." The second man paced. Catherine could hear his hard-soled shoes clicking furiously against the hardwood. "Dominic is calling for a sit-down. He's citing the commission rules. You broke a civilian, unprovoked. Well, unprovoked in their eyes. You broke the truce." "I didn't break a truce, Victor," Leo said. The sound of a glass clinking against a crystal decanter echoed in the quiet apartment. "I made a correction. Tommy laid hands on someone under my protection." Catherine's breath hitched. Under my protection. He had claimed her, officially, to the underworld. A waitress? Victor sounded incredulous. "You claimed a waitress? Jesus Christ, Leo. The capos are whispering. They think you're going soft. They think you let a pretty face from a grease pit dictate policy. If you wanted to screw her, you buy her a condo and keep it quiet. You don't shatter Dominic's nephew's skull and drag her into the penthouse." Silence. Total, suffocating silence fell over the living room. Catherine held her breath. She expected Leo to defend her. She expected him to explain the alley, the blood, the card. Instead, she heard the sound of heavy footsteps. Fast. A sharp gasp, followed by the sickening thud of a body being shoved hard against the wall. "Let me make something perfectly clear to you, Victor." Leo's voice was no longer a rumble. It was a low, vibrating growl, a predator baring its teeth. "You are my consigliere. You advise me on money. You advise me on the territory. You do not speak about what is mine. You do not speak about her. If you ever refer to her as a whore again, I will cut out your tongue and feed it to the dogs at the yard. Nod if you understand." A desperate, choking sound followed. Victor was suffocating. "Nod," Leo whispered. Catherine stepped back from the door, her heart hammering against her cracked ribs. She was shaking. The violence she had seen in the alley wasn't a switch Leo flipped on and off. It was the very foundation of who he was. He was a king built on brutality. The sound of footsteps retreated. Someone straightened a jacket. I understand, boss," Victor wheezed, his voice stripped of all its previous arrogance. "I apologize. I crossed a line. Set the sit-down with Dominic for tomorrow night," Leo said, his voice entirely calm again. "The warehouse on 9th, neutral ground. He'll bring his heavy hitters. He wants a pound of flesh for Tommy. Let him try to take it." "What about the girl?" Victor asked, hesitant now. careful. Dominic might ask for her. Dominic can ask God for forgiveness when I put him in the ground. He isn't touching her. Catherine didn't wait to hear the rest. She walked away from the door, moving to the edge of the bed and sitting down heavily. She pulled the thick cashmere robe tighter around her body. She had spent her whole life avoiding men like this. Men who viewed the world in terms of territory, possession, and violence. She had kept her head down. She had served their coffee and looked the other way. Now she was standing at the dead center of a war zone, but as she sat there, listening to the heavy silence of the apartment, a strange, terrifying realization washed over her. She wasn't afraid of Leo. She was afraid of what she was willing to let him do for her. An hour later, the front door clicked shut. Victor was gone. The penthouse was quiet again. Catherine stood up. She walked to the bedroom door, turned the handle, and stepped out into the hallway. She didn't limp this time. She forced her back straight, ignoring the sharp protest of her ribs. She walked into the living room. Leo was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the grey, rain-slicked city. He held a glass of amber liquid in his left hand. The bruising on his knuckles looked darker today, an angry purple and black. He didn't turn around, but he knew she was there. "Eavesdropping is a bad habit, Catherine." "So is starting gang wars," she replied. Leo let out a low, dry chuckle. It was a rough sound, like a rusted hinge. He finally turned to face her. "I heard what you said to him," she said, crossing her arms defensively. "Victor, you heard what you needed to hear." "I am not a possession, Leo." "No," he agreed, walking toward a heavy oak desk in the corner of the room. He set his glass down. "You are not. But in their world, you have to belong to someone, or you are prey. Right now, you belong to me. It is the only shield you have." "And what happens when the shield breaks?" she asked, her voice steady. "What happens tomorrow night at the warehouse when Dominic decides he doesn't care about your protection?" Leo stopped. He looked at her, his dark eyes analyzing the stubborn set of her jaw, the fierce, cynical light in her eyes that even a beating couldn't extinguish. "Then I kill him," Leo said simply. Catherine stared at him. She looked for the lie. She looked for the bravado. There was none. It was a statement of absolute fact. "I can't just sit in this apartment," she said, changing the subject, needing to ground herself in something practical. "I go crazy if I don't work. If I'm staying here, I need to do something. Clean, cook, look over books, something." Leo smiled. It was a small, dangerous smile. "You want a job?" he asked. "I want to not owe you my entire existence." Leo walked toward her. He stopped just a foot away, looking down at her bruised face. He reached out, his knuckle gently brushing against the uninjured side of her chin. "You don't owe me anything, Catherine," he murmured softly. "But if you want to work, I'll find you work. Just know that once you step out of the guest room and into my business, you don't get to step back out." Catherine didn't pull away from his touch. She looked up into his eyes, the cynical diner waitress meeting the gaze of the devil himself. "I've never been afraid of hard work, Leo." His smile widened slightly. "We'll see." The work Leo gave her wasn't a mop. It wasn't a kitchen knife. It was a heavy silver laptop, a secondary monitor, and 4 physical ledgers bound in cheap, scuffed leather. He had cleared off half of the massive oak desk in his office. He set a fresh cup of heavily creamed coffee next to the keyboard. "Fronts," Leo said, tapping the top ledger. "Laundromats, a string of bodegas in the East End. 2 waste management lots. Look at the operational costs versus the reported gross. Tell me if you see a story." Catherine sat down in the leather executive chair. The leather was cold. Her ribs ached fiercely as she leaned forward, resting her forearms on the desk. She opened the first book. "I manage the inventory and the register at St. Jude's," she said, her eyes already scanning the columns of handwritten numbers. "I didn't run a hedge fund, Leo. St. Jude's bled $300 a week in employee theft and off-the-books vendor payouts," Leo replied, walking toward the door. "I know because I watched your boss pretend not to notice. I also watched you adjust the fry oil orders to keep the bottom line from tanking so he wouldn't fire Hector. You understand margins, you understand survival. Math is the same everywhere." He left her alone. Catherine spent the next 5 hours submerged in a world of ink and spreadsheets. The pain medication dulled the throbbing in her face, replacing it with a hyper-focused clarity. Leo was right. Math didn't care if you were selling cherry pie or moving untaxed imports through a shipping container. A column of numbers either balanced or it lied. By 6 in the evening, the sun had dropped below the city skyline, casting long grey shadows across the office. Catherine rubbed her eyes, ignoring the slight pull of the stitches on her cheek. She took a sip of the cold coffee. She didn't need a hedge fund degree to see it. The theft wasn't even particularly clever. It was just arrogant. She stood up, grabbed the second ledger and the laptop, and walked out to the living room. Leo was sitting on the grey suede couch. He was cleaning a matte black semi-automatic pistol. He didn't look like a thug doing it. He looked like a mechanic maintaining a precision tool. He wiped the slide with an oiled cloth, the metallic clicks echoing in the large room. Catherine walked over and dropped the ledger onto the glass coffee table. The heavy thud made Leo pause. He looked up. "The bodegas are clean," she said, pointing to the book. "They make exactly what they claim to make. The waste management lots are bleeding you." Leo set the cloth down. He didn't touch the gun, but he left it resting on his knee. "Show me." Catherine walked around the table, carefully lowering herself onto the couch next to him. She opened the laptop, turning the screen toward him. "Your operational costs for the waste lots spiked 7 months ago. Specifically, the fuel surcharges and the vehicle maintenance budgets." She tapped a row of cells highlighted in red. "The problem is, the route logs in the physical ledger don't match the mileage required for that kind of fuel consumption. Ghost trucks. Someone is expensing fuel and maintenance for vehicles that never leave the yard." Leo stared at the screen. His expression remained entirely neutral. "How much?" "It averages out to a 6% leak on the total gross of the South End operation. Every month. It's systematic." She closed the ledger. "Whoever is filing these reports isn't just skimming, they are building a separate war chest." "Who signs off on the waste management budgets?" Leo asked softly. Catherine knew the name. She had seen it at the bottom of 40 different expense reports. She looked at Leo. She thought about the man who had paced this very room earlier, calling her a whore. "Victor," she said. Silence stretched between them. Leo didn't look surprised. He looked weary. The kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from knowing the world is exactly as ugly as you expect it to be. 6%, Leo repeated, picking up the pistol and sliding the magazine into the grip with a sharp clack. "Enough to pay off a dock boss? Enough to fund a strike?" Catherine's stomach tightened. "Dominic," Leo finally looked at her. The dark, terrifying gravity was back in his eyes. "Victor isn't just skimming. He's financing Dominic's tantrum. They are working together to force a sit-down. Why? Because if Dominic kills me tonight to avenge Tommy, the commission needs a transition plan. They need someone inside my organization to take the reins and keep the money flowing. Victor is selling me out for the big chair." Catherine felt the air leave her lungs. "You're walking into a trap." "I am," Leo agreed. He racked the slide of the pistol, chambering around. He engaged the safety and slid the weapon into a shoulder holster hidden beneath his tailored jacket. "Then don't go," she said, her voice rising. Panic, sharp and metallic, tasted like copper in her mouth. "Call the commission. Show them the ledgers. The commission doesn't care about ledgers, Catherine. They care about strength. If I don't show up, I am weak. If I complain about my own consigliere stealing from me, I am weak." Leo stood up, adjusting his cuffs. "I handle this tonight, in person." Catherine stood up too. The sudden movement sent a spike of agony through her ribs, but she ignored it. "I'm coming with you." Leo stopped dead. He turned to look at her. "Absolutely not." "I found the leak," she said, stepping toward him, tilting her chin up to meet his gaze. "I hold the numbers in my head. If Victor tries to lie, if Dominic tries to twist it, I have the exact dates, the exact routing numbers. You need me. I need you breathing. You step foot in that warehouse, and you are fair game." "I was fair game in the alley," she shot back. "I was fair game when I was serving coffee. I'm done hiding behind dumpsters, Leo. If I belong to you, if I'm under your protection, then let me stand next to you." Leo stared at her. He saw the bruised cheek, the stitches, the exhaustion. But beneath all of it, he saw a spine made of absolute iron. He saw a woman who had spent her life being stepped on, finally deciding to bite back. He reached out, his hand wrapping around the back of her neck. His grip was firm, grounding her. His thumb rested against her pulse point. It was racing. "Put your shoes on," he said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper, "and stay behind me." The rain hadn't stopped. It was a torrential, freezing downpour that turned the streets into black mirrors. The warehouse on 9th Street sat at the edge of the industrial district, surrounded by rusted shipping containers and broken chain-link fences. Leo's navigator rolled to a stop outside the massive corrugated metal doors. 2 black sedans were already parked in the lot. Catherine sat in the passenger seat. She was wearing a heavy black trench coat Leo had found in a guest closet. It swallowed her frame, but it hid the bandages and the trembling of her hands. "Keep your mouth shut unless I ask you a direct question," Leo said, cutting the engine. "Dominic is a butcher. He doesn't respect women, and he doesn't respect civilians. Do not look him in the eye." "Understood," she said. Her voice was steady, even if her insides felt like ice water. They stepped out into the rain. Leo didn't wait for his men. He didn't have an entourage. He walked toward the side entrance of the warehouse, his stride long and unbothered. Catherine followed closely, the heavy coat dragging against the wet concrete. The inside of the warehouse smelled of diesel fuel, damp concrete, and old iron. Harsh overhead floodlights illuminated a clearing in the center of the vast, empty space. A folding table sat in the middle of the light. Dominic was waiting. He was a wide, heavy-set man with a thick neck and a face that looked like it had been constructed from raw meat. He wore a loud, pinstriped suit that stretched too tightly across his chest. 4 men stood behind him, their hands resting openly on the grips of weapons tucked into their waistbands. To Dominic's right stood Victor. He looked pale. The collar of his expensive shirt was dark with sweat. Leo walked into the light. Catherine stayed exactly 1 step behind his right shoulder. The shadow of his broad frame offered a terrifying comfort. "Leo," Dominic barked. His voice was a booming theatrical roar. "You brought a +1 to a commission sit-down. This isn't a charity gala." Leo stopped at the edge of the table. He didn't sit. "She's my accountant, Dominic. I find her attention to detail useful. Dominic laughed. It was an ugly, wet sound. He looked Catherine up and down, his eyes lingering on her bruised face. Accountant, right. Looks like she miscalculated a left hook. This the bitch Tommy tried to teach some manners to. Leo didn't react to the insult. His hands remained at his sides, relaxed. We are here to discuss the port blockades. Call off the strike, Dominic. Call off the strike. Dominic slammed a heavy, ring-covered hand onto the folding table. The metal buckled slightly. You put my nephew in a coma over a diner waitress. You broke the treaty. The commission knows it. I want blood, Leo. I want the girl, and I want the South End transit lines as compensation for the insult. Victor cleared his throat. He stepped forward slightly, playing his part. Leo, the commission might side with him. The optics are bad. If we surrender the transit lines, we avoid a war. It's a calculated loss. Catherine watched Victor's hands. They were shaking. He was terrified. He was trying to script Leo's downfall in real time. A calculated loss, Leo repeated softly. He looked at his consigliere. Victor, how long have we known each other? Victor blinked, thrown off by the question. 12 years, boss. 12 years. You handled the books for my father. You handled them for me. Leo slowly reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Every man behind Dominic tensed. Guns were half drawn. Leo ignored them. He pulled out a single sheet of paper, a printout from the laptop, and tossed it onto the folding table. It landed in a puddle of condensation. Catherine, Leo said, his eyes never leaving Victor's face. Explain the waste management ledgers to Dominic. Catherine stepped out from behind Leo's shadow. Her ribs screamed in protest, but she stood completely straight. She didn't look at Dominic. She looked directly at Victor. For the past 7 months, Victor has been falsifying the fuel and maintenance logs for the South End waste lots, she said. Her voice rang out clear and cold in the cavernous warehouse. He has diverted exactly 6.2% of the gross revenue into dummy accounts. That money was then routed to a shell corporation holding the deed to the East Side docks. Dominic's face twitched. He isn't just stealing from Leo, Catherine continued, the cynicism of the diner serving her perfectly now. She was exposing a dine and dash, just on a larger scale. He's been funding your dock strikes, Dominic. He paid you to create the problem, so he could convince Leo to surrender the transit lines to settle the debt. The transit lines that Victor would then control once the commission forced Leo out. The warehouse went dead silent. Only the sound of the rain drumming against the metal roof echoed in the dark. Victor's face went from pale to a sickly, ashen grey. Leo, she's lying. She's a street rat. You're going to take the word of a battered waitress over your own blood? Dominic looked at the paper on the table. He couldn't read the spreadsheets, but he understood the trap. He looked at Victor, his eyes narrowing into small, violent slits. You told me the money came from your private reserves, Vic. You used Leo's money to pay me to fight Leo? Dominic, wait, Victor stammered, taking a step back. You made me look like a cheap mercenary, Dominic snarled. The alliance fractured in an instant. The old-school dog realized he had been played by the accountant. Leo didn't wait for the argument to escalate. He moved. It wasn't a movie. There were no slow-motion dives or witty one-liners. It was terrifyingly fast, brutal, and utterly efficient. Leo grabbed the edge of the folding table and violently flipped it upward, sending it crashing into Dominic's chest. The heavy man staggered backward with a grunt. In the same fraction of a second, Leo drew the pistol from his shoulder holster. 2 of Dominic's men raised their weapons, but Leo fired first. 2 suppressed shots. Thwip! Thwip! Both men dropped, the sound of their bodies hitting the concrete, heavy and final. The remaining two men scrambled for cover behind a rusted forklift. Leo didn't pursue them. He didn't even look at them. He grabbed the lapels of Catherine's oversized trench coat with his free hand and physically threw her backward behind a concrete structural pillar. She hit the ground hard. The impact jarred her cracked ribs, tearing a sharp, involuntary scream from her throat. She curled into a ball, clutching her side, gasping for air as gunfire erupted in the warehouse. The deafening cracks of unsuppressed weapons echoed off the metal walls. Concrete dust exploded above her head as a stray bullet chipped the pillar. She pressed her hands over her ears, shutting her eyes. She was back in the alley, the helplessness, the pain, but then the gunfire stopped. It lasted less than 10 seconds. "Hold your fire!" Dominic's voice roared, echoing through the smoke and dust. "Hold your fire, damn it!" Catherine opened her eyes. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire. She forced herself up onto her knees, peering around the edge of the concrete pillar. Dominic was backed against a shipping container. He was bleeding from a graze on his shoulder. His remaining two men had their guns lowered, looking at their boss for a command. In the center of the room, standing entirely exposed under the harsh floodlights, was Leo. His gun was raised, perfectly level, aimed directly at the head of a man kneeling on the floor. Victor, the consigliere, was on his knees in the puddles of rainwater and blood. He was sobbing, his hands clasped together in front of his chest. "Leo, please," Victor begged. The arrogance was completely stripped away, leaving only a pathetic, hollow core. "I can fix it. I can transfer the money back. I have the accounts. You need me to untangle the shell companies." Leo looked down at the man who had betrayed him. His face was a mask of cold, unyielding stone. "Dominic!" Leo called out, his voice cutting through Victor's whimpering. Dominic wiped a streak of blood from his neck, glaring at Leo. "What? You want blood for Tommy?" Leo said. "Tommy laid hands on my property. That debt was settled in the alley, but Victor used your men. He insulted your intelligence, and he used my money to buy your loyalty. The treaty holds. We go back to our respective borders. You keep the money he already paid you." Dominic looked at Victor, then back at Leo. A heavy, begrudging respect settled over the older mobster's face. He knew when a war wasn't worth fighting. He knew when he was outmatched. "The treaty holds," Dominic spat. He gestured to his men. "Get the bodies. We're leaving." Dominic's crew moved quickly, dragging their dead toward the back exit. They didn't look at Victor. Victor realized he was entirely alone. He looked up at Leo, tears streaming down his face. "Leo, boss, we grew up together. Your father—" "My father is dead," Leo said softly. "And you called her a whore." Leo pulled the trigger. The sound was sharp and definitive. Victor slumped sideways, hitting the wet concrete, and didn't move again. Catherine flinched, pressing her back against the pillar. Her breathing was ragged, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had seen the aftermath in the alley. She had seen the books. But seeing the execution, the absolute, clinical removal of a human life, shattered whatever illusions she had left. Footsteps approached. Slow, heavy. Leo stopped on the other side of the pillar. He holstered the weapon. He looked down at his hands, wiping a speck of blood from his knuckle, before stepping around the concrete to look at her. He didn't offer a hand this time. He just stood there, letting her process the violence she had just witnessed, letting her see the monster in the light. "Can you walk?" he asked quietly. Catherine looked up at him. She saw the blood on his cuff. She saw the coldness in his eyes that he used to keep the world at bay. But as she looked at him, The coldness fractured, just a little. He was checking on her. He had thrown her behind cover before returning fire. He had shielded her first. She wasn't a waitress anymore. And he wasn't just a customer in the back booth. "I can walk," she whispered. She pushed herself up, ignoring the agonizing burn in her side. She didn't brush past him. She walked up to him, stopping inches away. Leo looked down at her, his jaw tight. "You shouldn't have come." "You would have been blind without me," she countered, her voice shaking slightly, but her eyes locked on his. Leo let out a slow, heavy breath. The tension in his massive shoulders finally dropped. He reached out, his hand gently wrapping around her uninjured waist, pulling her flush against his side to support her weight. "Yes," he admitted, his voice a low, rough rumble. "I would have." They walked out of the warehouse together, leaving the bodies and the betrayals in the dark. The rain had stopped. The city skyline was beginning to glow with the faint, bruised light of dawn. Catherine leaned her head against his chest as they walked to the car. She heard the steady, heavy beat of his heart. She knew exactly what kind of world she had just tied herself to. It was violent, dark, and unforgiving. But as Leo opened the passenger door for her, his large hand gently shielding her head from the doorframe, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. In a world full of wolves, she had found the biggest one, and he was hers. Catherine just proved she's not just a damsel in distress. She's a queen who can hold her own in Leo's brutal empire. What started with a desperate call from a diner alley ended in blood, loyalty, and a dangerous new alliance. Did Leo go too far to protect her? Or is this exactly the kind of ruthless love she needs to survive? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this intense Mafia romance, hit that like button, share with your fellow drama lovers, and subscribe so you never miss the next thrilling story.
You can get an all black marker set. Wait, really? What do you do with that? Everything in the back. I know. Heinz's work is wild. Can't wait to see you live at the World's Strongest Woman contest. Yeah, I'll be there. I'll be there. Thank you for the tweak. Hi, Wasmus. Yeah, a coffin. Isn't that fucking sick? It's so cool. Hi, Spectre. Heinz is very crafty. Ha ha ha. I see what you did there. Look at this. Look at this. So sick. Bury me in that right now. I know. Fucking. Look at this. Look at this. Ooh. Did you already try to paint on glass with acrylic markers? Sunny, no. Painting some oil bottles and crafts. No, I have not tried it, but look, I have this right here. We could try that right now. Yeah, can I pre